The tragedy which took place last Sabbath in Pittsburgh has touched many of us in all faith communities. Our churches, our mosques, our synagogues, and all of our respective houses of worship are intended to be sacred spaces where we seek and find comfort, reassurance, and friendship. This past weekend, many of us attended some type of faith service in our respective communities. We joined together in peace, as did worshipers at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh. We could not imagine that a madman would violate our worship by indiscriminately murdering innocent people. Today, we express concern and fear for our safety in the sanctuaries which we so deeply cherish. At first impulse, many of us are probably filled with both anger and fear. The murderer from last Saturday is a known anti-Semite. His poison has been published throughout the social media. His intentions were well known. His hatred for the Jewish people. Sadly, we have witnessed similar hatred directed at other faith groups and ethnicities. There has been too much homophobia and intolerance, which has led to the violence and unspeakable tragedies elsewhere in our country. We are evolving into a society which breeds a climate of hate, suspicion, xenophobia, intolerance, and fear. Whatever our views about immigration, the media, or politics in general, when we demonize one another, we create an atmosphere of blind and uncontrollable hate and resentment. For some of us, our strong disagreements remain in the realm of words. For others, however, words become the stepping stone for acts of violence committed against people whom we now brand as enemies. Our hatred manifests itself in the kind of horrors we witnessed in Pittsburgh. Ideally, houses of worship like the Tree of Life would be acknowledged as inspiring models for creating a holy place filled with kindness, compassion, and tolerance. Instead, people throughout America speak today about the Tree of Life Synagogue as the latest illustration of the cruelty our society is cultivating. So this week we mourn again. We mourn for 11 souls in Pittsburgh taken from us in a senseless, violent act. Yet even in our grief, we must commit to action. So what can we do? On a practical and immediate level, houses of worship are already addressing questions of adequate security. This morning in my own congregation, the chief of police met with our staff to offer both suggestions as well as an ongoing commitment to partnership between the police and the synagogue. I know that our law enforcement officials everywhere are reaching out to houses of worship in similar fashion. All of us will take whatever practical steps possible to further ensure the security and well-being of all who enter our sacred space. It is sad that we must devote so much attention to security at the expense of Torah and other forms of worship and study. But the safety of our communities is a priority. In addition, when we hear someone speaking intolerantly, or we see intolerance conveyed on our social media, we have a sacred duty to respond. even in our family discussions, we have an obligation to call out the prejudices and the narrow-minded opinions offered by loved ones. Difference of opinion does not mean condoning hatred. On a more spiritual level, now is the time for us to stand together, not only in worship, but in expressions of solidarity as faith communities. We must continue to honor our houses of worship as Mikomot Kadosh, sacred places which remain open to everyone. As a Jewish leader, I join with my colleagues in reaffirming how we will stand up to hatred and bigotry, just as the Jewish community has done throughout history. I know our counterparts in other faiths will join us in this endeavor. Finally, the first step toward healing begins with each of us. Whatever our political or social views, the rhetoric in our nation must change. We can no longer demonize one another and accept an atmosphere of intolerance and polarization. We cannot tolerate racism and hatred against people of a different complexion, ethnicity, or gender orientation. No one has monopoly over truth, but no one has the right to violate the honor and dignity of any person because our beliefs may differ. In my speaking, I have often invoked the names of Hillel and Shammai, the two great rabbinic authorities of ancient Israel. Hillel generally expressed a more lenient interpretation of Jewish law. Shammai generally expressed a stricter reading of tradition. Yet our rabbinic texts indicate that when the students of Hillel sat down to deliberate an issue, the opinions of Shammai were always examined first. A mutual respect existed between both schools of interpretation. Everyone spoke in the spirit of dignity and honor. So in our discussions, from the top levels of Washington to the conversations around our dinner tables, we need to recommit to the spirit and practice of Hillel and Shammai. It is imperative that we remind ourselves how America's greatness lies in its diversity and openness. We may not prevent every mad person on earth from acting upon his or her irrational hatred and anger, but we can help eliminate the madness within each of us. In the meantime, as we pray for the victims this past Sabbath and for their families, let us also pray for one another. May we pray to do our part in helping to heal our country and to embrace the values of respect, dignity, and tolerance. Let us hope that never again will there be a need for such a prayer.